Does this show have an actual name? Does this album review have an actual name? I'm thinking it's going to be called Rewind Factor, but I don't really know that it needs a name. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Source Reviews Albums. Today, 1989 is the number, another summer. Yeah, those are the words of one Chuck D from Public Enemy, but they also apply to today's album, which is from the West Coast, West, y'all. The D.O.C. is the diggy diggy doc, y'all. No one can do it better. This album dropped in August of 1989 and still bangs right now. I know a lot of y'all are thinking, ain't the D.O.C. from Dallas? Yes, the D.O.C. is originally from Dallas, but as far as the whole country, planet, we know the D.O.C. as part of NWA's circle and being a West Coast artist, representing with Dr. Dre for the most part. And No One Can Do It Better is a West Coast classic. It's a classic in hip hop, period, if you want to be honest about it. I would suggest, whether you've heard it or have never heard it, go back and listen to this joint. It's going to make you feel some type of way, I'm trying to tell you. So a few weeks ago, probably a month and a half ago, I went back and listened to this album just out of the blue. I put that joint on and I was like, it took me back immediately. It took me back, especially the fact that it starts out with It's Funky Enough, straight out the gate. And that single was crazy at the time. And just hearing the D.O.C. really for the first time on a grand scale. Well, probably the first time I ever heard D.O.C. in real time. And that joint just hit like a hammer, for real. Not like MC Hammer, hit like a hammer. But yeah, dope single. And I think dope is an understatement. The whole album, though, top to bottom, is fire. There's only one song that I don't like. I think I like to love every song on this album except two. One is cool, one I don't really care for. But this is definitely a classic. I learned after 25 years of sitting with Mobb Deep's The Infamous and never being willing to call it a classic because it had two joints that I didn't love on it. I learned since then that I don't have to love every song for it to be a classic. So about 2 years ago, I upgraded Mobb Deep in my mind. Maybe a year ago, I upgraded Mobb Deep's The Infamous in my mind from 4.5 to 5 mics, 5 stars, however you want to say it. But back to the D.O.C. This is a 5 micer out the gate. I'm just letting you know that. You start with It's Funky Enough, like I mentioned, mind blowing and lend me an ear, banger, banger. Then we get to a joint that I totally forgot about. I totally forgot about Let the Bass Go. This might be my favorite song on the album. Between It's Funky Enough and Let the Bass Go. I know a lot of y'all gonna say a song that I'll mention at the end, but Let the Bass Go is crazy to me. It has a feel to it. And every time it starts, I'm like, It's a vibe, for real. The next song after Let the Bass Go is the one song that I don't really care for, which is Beautiful But Deadly. I just wasn't buying into the whole, the concept of the song and the guitar. Just not my thing. But then you come right back with the D.O.C. and the Doctor. We back on track. No One Can Do It Better, Whirlwind Pyramid. We're going bangers out the gate. And then Whirlwind Pyramid actually turns up the BPMs a little bit, or at least the energy on the album. Like it's 80s. It's 80s. It feels like the 80s. Now, there's a difference between, I explained this kind of in the MC Light joint. There's a difference between something sounding like it's from its time frame or something sounding dated. This album does not sound dated to me at all. I actually listened to another album from a different artist from California that I won't mention right now. And I listened to that album and I was like, yo, this does not slap like I thought it did in the 90s. It was probably good at that time, but it's just not the same now. This album sounds like it's from the West Coast in the 80s/90s, but it does not sound dated at all to me. If there's a difference, I hope that was understood. The Formula, another slapper that had a video and you might recognize even if you've never heard the album in total. Portrait of a Masterpiece. And then we get to, I was about to say, then we get to the grand finale, but that's the actual title. Then we get to the grand finale, which is the grand finale. That includes NWA on that thing. And then the D.O.C. finishes it off. A lot of people say that Ice Cube's verse, which was the lead verse, is one of the best lead verses on any song, any crew song in hip hop history. I can't argue with that. Salute to Ice Cube. But D.O.C. smashed on that thing and completed his album, which is a classic in fine fashion. Shout out to Dr. Dre. As always, shout out to Dr. Dre for the production work. Even though the D.O.C. had the car accident same year, like before the end of the year, he had the car accident that, depending on who you ask, affected or kind of destroyed his voice. He still made his mark in music, was still making his mark in music with the writing. So he wrote for Easy, Dre, he wrote on the Chronic, Easy Does It, and a couple other projects that are notable, but specifically for NWA. So you would think it was for Easy and for Dre for the most part. Nevertheless, salute to the D.O.C. classic album. I promise you, if you put it on right now, you're gonna go back to the 80s, even if you weren't there, even if you're younger than being alive in the 80s, you're gonna know what the 80s was like in LA on the West Coast. That's how I feel about it. That's my East Coast thoughts about it and how it makes me feel. So shout out to Dre and NWA, everybody that was involved in this album, and especially shout out to the D.O.C. It's the Diggy Diggy Doc, y'all. No one can do it better.